This is Pohlmeyer with Progress Texas, and I'm here with Cristina Tzintzún Ramirez, who is running for U.S. Senate here in our state. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to do a rapid fire set of questions here. The first one is on voting rights. If elected, what policies would you put forward to expand voting rights in our state and ensure that Texas ends its history of voter suppression?
So I spent a number of years leading some of our state's most important voting and civil rights organizations. I think the idea of democracy has always been a radical proposition in this country, even from our founding when we only extended the franchise to white land-owning men, and today it's just as radical. The idea that by our single vote, that there are no kings, that we are all equal, regardless of our gender, our sexual orientation, our income, or our race, and that you have to protect democracy, and that the way you do that is by making sure that everyone can vote as easily as possible, that is legally eligible. So one, I think that we have to make voter registration in this country not an opt-in system, but an opt-out system. Everyone should be able to already be registered if they are eligible to do so as a U.S. citizen. I want to make Election Day a national holiday so that everyone can get to the polls as easily as possible. When I think of what July 4th is to this country, I want to see Election Day be that for families across this country, because it truly is a celebration in my mind that we've had a democracy in this country as long as we had, and everyone should be able to participate.
That sounds joyous.
It's going to be an amazing, I imagine an amazing party across the country where people really do celebrate what it means to vote and get to show that to their kids and their families and their communities. And then I want to make sure that we are restoring really important components of the Voting Rights Act to make sure that we're protecting the franchise for communities of color and communities that have historically had the rights of their vote suppressed. And I feel like this is one of the most important areas that Democrats are starting to lead at the federal level, and I want to continue to lead in this country and make sure that things like the census also cannot be weaponized. Here in Texas, we have the opportunity to gain numerous congressional seats and electoral votes, but we don't do that if Republicans get to undercount immigrants and their children in the U.S. Census.
Absolutely right. On abortion access, do you support repealing the Hyde Amendment, and would you support an expansion to Medicaid that includes funding abortion?
Yes to both of those, and I want to explain why that is. So one, I have always been a person that's pro-choice, and I'm pro-choice because of my mom and my family. My mom, after she gave birth to me and my brother, doctors told her, do not have any more children. She nearly bled to death with my brother, and they said, if you have another child, you are likely to die. And my mother was very religious. It was a really hard decision for her to have an abortion, but for her, it was the right decision for her health, her family, and us, her children. And I believe that that should be the choice of every single woman, and not of politicians. And my mom was low income. She grew up very poor, and for a long time in my family we didn't have access to the resources necessary. I want to make sure that everyone has access to the health care they need, and to me, access to abortion is one of those basic questions about healthcare access. The last thing I want to say about abortion is that when I think about John Cornyn now, he says he's the candidate of pro-family values, and that he supports the rights of women, yet he wants to exclude our rights over our own bodies, but then also do things like vote against equal pay for women, vote against the Violence Against Women Act, and that there's only 5 countries in the whole world that don't offer paid maternity leave, and the United States is one of them. And he doesn't support paid maternity leave for mothers to be with their newborn children. So I feel like I am the candidate that actually understands the needs of mothers, that understands the needs of babies and families and communities. And to me, abortion access is one of those fundamental rights that are the rights of families and women to make for themselves.
I love that. I love, framing it as a family issue as well. When it comes to gun reform, which I know a lot of Texas families are talking about and around their dinner tables and elsewhere, what are the common sense gun reforms that you believe we can enact now, that need to be enacted now?
Yeah, so, from traveling the state over the last few months, it's been one of the number one issues I hear about is about how people are afraid for their children, about what we saw happen in Odessa and El Paso, communities of color that feel like they've become targets with the rise of white supremacy. The last 4 mass shootings happened here in Texas. We have become ground zero for the gun debate. I graduated high school the year of the Columbine shooting, and I've been waiting my entire adult life to see Congress act and do very basic things like pass universal background checks, ban assault-style weapons, and instead we've been teaching a generation of children to learn how to play dead in their classrooms. Like, that seemed like the more logical response to our politicians than burst into acting these. So I have signed on and support the March for Your Lives Peace Plan, a multi-step plan to really address gun violence, mass shootings, but also the disproportionate share of gun violence that women, children, and people of color face in this country. I know that we have the ability to address gun violence and how it's impacting not just those, we were just talking about this, not just people that are victims of gun violence, but our entire society that have all been impacted.
Absolutely. When it comes to healthcare, what is your vision of access to affordable healthcare for Texans, and how do you see that impacting their lives?
So, I support Medicare for all, and I support Medicare for all not only because I believe it's the best system, the most fair system, the most efficient and cost-effective system to ensure that in the richest nation in the world, we can all go to the doctor when we are sick and have the highest quality healthcare when we need it. But I support it because if you look at our current system, by allowing private health insurance companies to profit off of our pain, our suffering, and illness, we've not only created the most expensive healthcare system in the world, but one with some of the worst outcomes of any industrialized nation. I want Medicare for all because I believe that in this country, when we are all participating and bought into the same system, we actually make sure it works for everyone. You look at a system like Medicaid that's based on income. People say, let's make Medicare for all. We like choices. Well, those are talking points parroted by the right wing. There was just the former Cigna CEO talking that's now become an evangelist for universal health care because he saw how broken the healthcare industry was and private insurance companies are, that these are the talking points of the right wing. These are the talking points of the health insurance companies that don't want us to have high quality healthcare. If you look at something like Medicaid, it's not accepted at every single doctor office. So it's substandard care. I want to make sure if we were all bought into the same system, we would make sure it works for everyone. And then if you also look at Social Security, a system that, again, that we're all bought into, we make sure when it comes under attack, as a country, people stand up across income, across communities, zip codes, race, ethnicity, because it's a benefit for everyone. I want us to defend in this country the right to high quality healthcare for every single American as a basic and fundamental right of being part of this country.
Thank you so much. Talking about being part of this country too, it's a good little segue. How would you ensure that our immigration system treats immigrants, especially here in Texas, with the dignity and respect that they deserve, and ensure that their basic rights are being taken care of?
So I really think that perhaps no state has benefited more from the contributions culturally and economically that immigrants bring than Texas. So 1 in 3 Texans are like me. My mom's from Mexico. We are immigrants or children of immigrants in this state. And I spent a decade advocating for the rights of immigrant workers. I worked in the construction industry, leading an organization called Workers Defense Project, where half of the people in the state who build our schools, our homes, our roadways do so without documentation. And I saw them lose their limbs, their lives, building our state's economy. And I've seen the cost of an immigration system that's willing to accept undocumented workers' labor, but not their full humanity. I think we have an opportunity and a responsibility as Democrats on immigration, not just to say what we're against, but to say what we stand for. So of course we're against putting children in cages, but we have an opportunity to overhaul our entire immigration system, to allow people to come to the country safely and legally, be honest about our economic needs and our labor needs. Half of the people building our state's homes, office buildings are undocumented. The majority of the people that pick our fruit crops or put eggs on our table are undocumented immigrants. We need them to be in this country safely, legally, and we need to protect their rights. I want to see us take money out of ICE that's right now being used to break families apart, and instead fund to the full capacity the Department of Labor and OSHA to make sure that we're enforcing the rights, not just of immigrants, but American workers, because it's about protecting both immigrant and American workers. And the last thing I would say on immigration is, I do not believe that John Cornyn and Donald Trump are just afraid of people like my 62-year-old immigrant Mexican mother, but that they are deeply afraid of people like me, her U.S. citizen daughter that can vote, and the power of our communities coming together. And so whether they're trying to talk about rescinding the rights of dreamers, stopping asylum seekers from coming to this country, undercounting immigrants and their children, that these tools are used specifically against communities of color. That is why our president is more willing to talk about wanting immigrants from Norway than people from Haiti and other countries that he called shithole countries. So much of the debate about immigration is actually about race and voting power and who we become as a country. And so I do think that Donald Trump and them are afraid of the power of our vote.
All right, and our final question is really, what is your path toward flipping Texas, toward building this progressive power next year, and what do you want Texans to know about you?
So I've spent a decade and a half leading and building some of our state's most important voting and civil rights organizations, getting out voters that you absolutely need to win in Texas. So I want to be the candidate that represents all Texans. I'm really proud that the most recent poll has me leading #1 in the state, that it shows I have a diverse coalition that looks like who Texas is, that is both white, brown, and black. But we all know that in Texas, no Democrat wins without driving up margins amongst young and Latino voters, period. And I'm one of the people that's done the best job at doing that in this state. That's why I was asked to run by some of the folks that are some of the top progressive operatives in our state and folks that ran Beto O'Rourke's Senate race, because we all know we need those voters to win. So at my last organization, JOLT, which I launched in November 2016, I helped lead and build initiatives along with our partners at Move Texas and Texas Freedom Network. We collectively registered 1 in 5 voters in Texas in 2018.
Amazing.
And got nearly 70% of them out to vote. I also, at JOLT, we went and knocked on the doors of tens of thousands of Latino voters, getting new voters out that have never voted before. I know the message matters, I know the messenger matters, and I know that when we turn out people, when we go and speak to them in their communities and talk about the real issues that they face, that is how we get them out to vote. So I'm an organizer that prides myself on getting people to participate that oftentimes wouldn't. I pride myself on getting people to feel a sense of belonging in their own power, and that we have tremendous power as progressive Texans to not just change our state in 2018 and not just to send a message to John Cornyn, but to send a message to Donald Trump and the rest of the country and their supporters. If there are people that want to take us backwards as a country, that want to cling to the past, that they can have it, but that the future will belong to all of us, a progressive coalition that looks like who America is today.
Thank you so much for joining us. We so appreciate it, and we'll post more about how you can get involved online.
Great, thanks so much.